joy come every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. I count the joy come every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. I count the joy come every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. I count the joy come every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. I count the joy come every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. There's a grace when the heart is under fire, another way when the walls are closing in. And when I look at the space between where I used to be and this reckoning, I know I will never be alone. There was another in the fire, standing next to me. There was another in the waters, holding back the seas. And should I ever need reminding of how I've been set free, there is a cross that bears a burden where another died for me. There is another in the fire. Dead, left for dead beneath the waters. I'm no longer a slave to my sin anymore. Should I fall in the space between what remains of me and this reckoning? Either way, I won't bow to the things of this world. And I know I will never be alone. There is another in the fire, standing next to me. There is another in the waters, holding back the seas. And should I ever need reminding what power sets me free, there is a grave that holds nobody, and now that power lives in me. There is another in the fire. Oh, 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 I can see the light in the darkness as the darkness bows to him. I can hear the roar in the heavens as the space between wrestling. I can feel the ground shake beneath us as the prison walls cave in. Nothing stands between us. Nothing stands between us. Nothing stands between us, God. There is no other name but the name that is Jesus. He who was and still is and will be through it all. So come what may in the space between all the things unseen and this reckoning, and I know I will never be alone.
Alright, what's up, Catapult? If you guys are surprised by this hair and this outfit, it's my new quarantine look that I've changed up just because I wanted to fit more in with you guys. Just kidding, it's for VBS. I'm doing a little character. If you guys joined VBS a long time ago, I'm Archie again. But anyways, yeah, actually for VBS we do have a 5K today. So if you guys want to join that, it's a 5K run. You guys do it on your own, but you guys can sign up online and like we do it all together kind of thing. So yeah, join us for that if you guys can. Other than that, welcome to our Sunday live stream service. We're so happy to have you. Let's get some highs in the chats, maybe some praise gods, and yeah, and let's just get started with the word, with the praise, and then we'll get to a sermon. All right.
Catapult. Hope you guys are doing well. I know for a lot of us now, we're on summer break. I know you've been looking forward to it because during the school year, you're thinking about, man, I just need the weekend. I just need a break. I just need some rest. And now for a lot of us, we're in summer. I know some of you guys do have summer school and you guys are doing extracurriculars and things like that, preparing for the next school year. But the sad thing about summer break, as much as we look forward to it, is at the end of it, it's gonna be over, and then we're gonna have to go back and grind, back in school. See, I think part of the stress that I've seen over the years in student ministry, as I look at you guys, is there's just so much competition now. Back in the day when students got, pretty good scores, pretty good GPAs, a decent amount of extracurricular, they could get into great elite universities and colleges. But now everyone is so much smarter, there's so much more to do, there's more classes, more internships, so much more work, and I think it's so burdensome for a lot of you, and it becomes so exhausting. That you need to get higher GPAs and grades and everything else, whether it comes to athletics or arts or extracurriculars. And then on top of that, there's also the burden of all the social dynamic now, all the online stuff, social media, all the hanging out with friends, all of that is also part of your life. And so, when we really think about all there is to do for a lot of us, it just feels very tiring. There's a lot of exhaustion, fatigue. When we think about all the pressure, all the relationships, all the schoolwork, our future, there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. For a lot of us, panic attacks, we get breakdowns because of all the things that are going on. There is just work to be done, whether it's academic or social or spiritual or emotional or relational. There's so much work. And if you're feeling like that, just so burdened, I think maybe what we need is rest. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. The idea of Sabbath. See, Sabbath, it means rest. Not just taking a nap, not just going to sleep, but Sabbath means true rest, spiritual rest, for even our souls. Today we're going to be looking at two stories about Sabbath. First, we're going to look at what Sabbath actually is. Then we're going to look at why we need Sabbath. And lastly, how we can practice Sabbath and incorporate it into our lives, especially for a lot of us. I know a lot of you out there are workaholics. I know definitely there's at least some, like freshman girls watching. I know you guys might be workaholics. I know for some of us, we're like, oh, I am not a workaholic at all. I'm on the other end. Like, I'm really chill, I'm really lax. If anything, I maybe need to work more. But for both sides, I think we actually need to capture what true Sabbath means and what true Sabbath is. And in the two short stories we're going to look at today, Jesus, he's going to be interacting with this group. They're called the Pharisees. They're the religious leaders. And they've been giving Jesus a lot of problems, kind of so far, but today they're going to really be pushed over the edge. Because for the religious leaders, for the Pharisees, the Sabbath is something that is of maybe one of the most highest priorities for them. See, the reason why they cared about Sabbath so much is Sabbath is the primary thing that distinguished them from every other group. So as the Jewish leaders, they believe that everyone else knows that they're Jewish, that they're spiritual, that they have authority by how serious they took the Sabbath. So on Saturday, on the end of their week, if you were a Pharisee, you would have to abide by these really intense rules. It was so intense that they actually created 39 rules around the Sabbath, around Saturday, so that they didn't have to do any work at all. In fact, if you walked over a kilometer, if you had to prepare food, if you did some of these things, if you did work in any type of way, then you would be breaking Sabbath. And the more serious you took the Sabbath, the greater you were as a Pharisee, the more religious or spiritual you were. And because of all of this, because of how intensely they kept the law, because it's the fourth command out of the 10 commandments to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, in these two stories on the Sabbath, they get so incredibly mad, they get infuriated at Jesus. But let's see how Jesus handles it, and let's see what he says about Sabbath for them and for us. Because I think for a lot of us, we do need to Sabbath, and we do need true spiritual rest. And so if you have your Bible, or you could just look along somewhere here, we're going to be in Mark 2. We're going to pick up our story in Mark 2, 23 and on. And I'll read to the end of verse 28. But Mark 2, 23, it says, "One Sabbath, he was going through the grain fields. And as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. And the Pharisees were saying to him, 'Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?' And he said to them, 'Have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry, he and those who were with them? How he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar, the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which it is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him.'" And I'll just pause here for now. But the story sets up on the Sabbath. Jesus is with his disciples. They're hungry. They pluck a few heads of grain, barley or wheat or whatever it is, and they begin to eat it. And the Pharisees stop them and says to Jesus, "Hey, what are you doing? This is the Sabbath. You're not allowed to harvest. You're not allowed to do work. You're not allowed to cook. You're not supposed to be doing this. Why are you doing this?" And Jesus responds, and he says, "Don't you know the story of David?" And he brings up this rather obscure story, and he says, King David, he was kind of a hero of yours, a spiritual hero, a leader. Don't you remember what happened in one of his stories? He was with his men. They were hungry, so they went into the temple. They asked the priest, "Do you have food for us?" And the priest gave them the bread of presence that was reserved only for priests. He gave it to them on the Sabbath, potentially. They ate it, and he fed his men. And God did not condemn David for going and taking this bread and giving it to his men. Do you see what Jesus is saying here? Jesus is saying to the Pharisees, David, the king of Israel, the former king of Israel, you didn't question what he did. So why are you questioning me? You're coming to me and saying, "Why are you doing this?" He says, if you're not questioning King David, then why would you question me? You must not understand who I am yet. Jesus is frustrated by the fact that they still don't understand who they're talking to. And just so it's clear for everyone, he says in verses 27 and 28, the story continues, it says this, Mark 2:27, "And he said to them, 'The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath.'" Jesus is clearly painting his identity here. And he's saying, if you didn't have a problem with King David, why do you have a problem with me? And already Jesus, so far, he's established himself as a man of authority. Authority to teach, authority to heal, authority to forgive. And now he's saying, I am Lord of the Sabbath. The Sabbath was built into the fabric of time. On the seventh day, God rested, and in Sabbath. And so what Jesus is saying here by saying, I am Lord of the Sabbath, is he's saying, I'm Lord over actually all of creation and time itself. Jesus is saying, don't you know who I am? The Pharisees asked Jesus, why are you doing this? And Jesus says, I'm the Lord of the universe. I'm the creator. Why would you question me? Don't you see who you're talking to? So Jesus has this encounter with them on the Sabbath. And then, okay, it's over, right? Jesus won again. He kind of made his final statement, got in the last word. But the Pharisees, they have another fight to pick. And in the next story, in the last story we're going to look at today, this is where they really get, pushed over the edge. This is the straw that breaks the camel's back for them. Another incident happens on the Sabbath, and this is where they can't stand Jesus anymore. Let's look at the last passage, I guess, for this morning in Mark 3. I'll read it for us. It says this. Mark 3:1. Again, he entered the synagogue, and there was a man with a withered hand. And they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. He said to the man with the withered hand, "Come here." And he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. Verse 5. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. Verse 6, the Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. So we see this, the second and last story we're going to look at this morning about Sabbath. Jesus goes into the synagogue on the Sabbath day. He sees a man with a withered hand, someone whose arm didn't grow as maybe it should have. And so the Pharisees are waiting there, and they're trying to catch Jesus red-handed in healing this man with a withered hand. And so Jesus purposely, he always knows what they're thinking, always knows what they want to do. And so Jesus, he goes up to this man and says, "Come here." And with the Pharisees watching on the Sabbath, he asks them, "Is it lawful for this to happen on the Sabbath? Is it better to do good or to do harm? Is it better to save life or to kill on the Sabbath?" And they're silent. That means they got shut down. They have nothing to say in response. They're ashamed. They're religious leaders, and their kind of legs got swapped out from underneath them. And after Jesus shuts them up, he goes to the man and says, "Stretch out your hand." And once he did that, healing. And that was the thing that made the Pharisees so infuriated that they began to collaborate with the Herodians. Herodians, they're this group that follows a political party, Herod, and they're actually enemies of the Pharisees. And so the Pharisees got so mad that they collaborated with their enemies to figure out how to kill Jesus. And this is how the story ends. And you might be wondering, okay, wow, the Pharisees got really mad about the Sabbath. Like, they care about it so much. But, like, why is that? Why is that happening? And the sad thing is, as I was explaining earlier, the Pharisees, they made it so important. Sabbath, it actually means, it's actually for rest, spiritual rest. But what they did is, they turned Sabbath into work. For them, they twisted it and they manipulated and distorted what Sabbath actually was supposed to be for. And so instead of resting and remembering God and keeping it holy in that way, for them, Sabbath became work in which they could build their identity. The more serious they took Sabbath, the more strict they enforced this, the more elevated they would be in their status, in their identity. And this was a very religious context. See, for a lot of us, if we're completely honest, when it comes to Sabbath, it was Saturday for them, Sunday for us, Sabbath. Maybe we don't take it as strictly as they would. Now, I know for some of us, we'll go on vacation on Sunday, or we'll go to a game or a tournament or whatever else we have. And it's not as serious. We're like, dude, man, I don't really have this problem of being so strict on a Sunday. But for them, it was a religious context. For us, though, something else is very similar, I think, for how we kind of manipulate and twist a gift of God that he gives to us. And maybe it's not particularly Sabbath, but I think we distort it in a very similar way where we draw our identity from. See, we might not be in the same religious context, but for a lot of us, we're in a hyper-academic context, where, as I was talking about before, in terms of competition, it feels like that. Some of you are workaholics, and you study so much, and you put in so much time and work, and now summer you're taking more classes and courses to get ahead, college courses, internships, you're doing all the volunteer work you can do, you're doing sports, and trying to run for ASB, you're trying to do all of this, and it's because of how academic our culture is. See, academia, education, school, it's to learn. It's for education. But we've taken that and elevated and added all these things on it, and so that school is no longer just education. It's a means for some of you to build your identity on. So if you get a certain GPA, if you do well enough in certain extracurriculars, if you perform well in sports or arts, that becomes your identity. The better you do, the more work you put in, the more you build your identity on those things. For some of us, it is school, highly academic. For others of us, it's not as academic, and some of you hate school, okay? For some of you, it's more the hyper social context that we're in. You're in such a life stage right now where relationships, who your friends are, how popular they are, your status, what you do, what they think of you, this matters so much. How many followers you have, how many likes you get. You care about these things. And so, if a friendship deteriorates, if there's breakup, if you become embarrassed, if you don't get invited, then these things destroy you. Why? See, relationships are good. Community is good. We need these things. They're good things, but the problem is building your identity on these things. And so you can't even make decisions. And if you know that someone is gossiping about you or doesn't like you, it'll destroy you because you built your identity on these things. And this is what the Pharisees did with the Sabbath. They took something good, a gift of God, and they built their identity on it. And they're saying, okay, I need to follow all the rules, I need to do above and beyond, because if I do it, then I'll really be seen as someone who is religious, then I'll feel good about myself, I'll know who I am. This is what happened with Sabbath. This is what happens with some of us when it comes to school and performance. This is what happens to some of us in regards to relationship, our appearance, our reputation, our personality. We build our identity on some of these things. And Jesus says to us, do you know what you're doing when you do this? Do you know what you look like? Do you know what you need? You need Sabbath. See, when the fourth commandment out of the 10, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, when that came out, do you know what the context was? Let me remind us. Moses led the people out. Moses is the one who came down with the tablets, right, the 10 Commandments. Who was he speaking to? Israel, right? They're Israel, the people of God. And they were just freed and liberated from slavery and oppression from Pharaoh and the Egyptians. And so they were former slaves. And God is saying to former slaves, Sabbath, rest. Why is this important for our context? Don't you see what's happening here? Do you see? Slaves, they never get a day off. They can't take a break. Work never ends for them. And when we build our identity on things like school, academics, performance, relationships, there is so much work to do. And it's so tiring and exhausting. And what's actually happening is, it shows that we're enslaved to these things. These things have control of our lives. So if school keeps ramping it up and saying, hey, you need a higher GPA, higher scores. If your friends say you need to do more, and you need to dress like this, and you need to talk like this, then we're at their mercy. We're enslaved to these things. And to people who struggle with all of this, Jesus says, God says to us, you need to Sabbath. You're working at all of these other things. You're building your identity on all these other things. And what you actually need is a break. You need to rest. You need Sabbath. What does that mean? What does that look like? See, at the end of these two stories, The Pharisees, the Herodians, they plot to destroy Jesus. They plot to kill him. Jesus understands. Towards the end of Jesus' life, there's the night before he knows he's going to die. He knows the Pharisees and the Herodians and everyone else has successfully collaborated against him. And he has a final meal with his disciples. And you know what he says to them? As he breaks the bread, he says, what? Does he say, do this and remember the Sabbath? No, he doesn't say that. What does he say? He says, he breaks bread and he says, do this in remembrance of me. When Jesus dies on the cross, his final words were, it is finished. And he took the cross for our sin. He was our substitute. He died on our behalf. Do you know what Jesus is saying? He is saying, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. I am your true rest. Remember, if you remember me and who I am, then you will no longer have to work anymore. You can actually find fulfillment. There is peace. All the anxiety, stress, and pressure you put on yourself, or that everyone else is putting on you, you can actually rest from all of it. It is finished. It's done. You can Sabbath. And the way that you do that is you rest in me. That's what Jesus says to us. See, after Jesus died on the cross for us and resurrected, something shifted. Not just in definition or abstraction, but actually practically in schedule and time. See, Jesus, the way he grew up, from Moses' time after he got that commandment of remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, from Moses' time all the way through the life of Jesus, the Sabbath was always on what day? The last day of the week, Saturday. And so you would work Monday or Sunday through Friday, and then on the seventh day you would rest on Saturday. That's kind of how the calendar is built. I know some of us, we have like Monday first, but Sunday's the first day. And so they would do that. But after Jesus died on Friday, track with me, he resurrected on Sunday. And also the Holy Spirit descended. Pentecost happened on Sunday. And if you read through the book of Acts, even in different places in the letters of Paul, he's talking about them gathering money in donations, gathering to worship and in praise, in prayer. And all of that happens on not the last day of the week, but the first day of the week now. And so for the Pharisees, what did that mean? That means they worked through the week to rest. What it means for us on this side of the cross now, after Jesus died and resurrected, we no longer Sabbath on Saturday, we Sabbath on Sunday. And Sunday is the first day of the week. The Pharisees, they work to rest. For us who put our faith in Jesus, we work from rest. It's absolutely different. It's looking at Jesus and what he's done for us, and that changing and shaping not only the way we rest, but the way that we work. So let me get really practical. Okay, we talked about what Sabbath is. It's true spiritual rest. We talk about all the problems we have with Sabbath and even other gifts that we build our identity on it when that's not meant for us to do. We're supposed to derive our identity from God and who he is. Remember him, as Jesus said. And so lastly, how can we actually practice Sabbath? So what does it mean for us to rest in Jesus? Does it mean to go to church on Sunday? Maybe that's part of it. For others of us, does it mean like I could just do whatever I want, just chill all day, stay at home, and if your mom like knocks on your door and tells you to do some chores, you can just be like, you know what, Mom? I'm Sabbathing. Can't you see? I'm just doing my own thing. No. What does Sabbath actually mean and what does it look like? Because we need spiritual rest that a vacation, that summer break cannot provide for us. So how do we Sabbath regularly? How do we do this? Two practical things. How do we rest in Jesus? Number one, we stop and trust in God. This is how we rest in Jesus. We stop and we trust in God. Sabbath, the word Shabbat, it literally means to stop, to cease activity. and to trust in him. A lot of the people back in the day, they were farmers. I know we don't really have, that context, but they had to work. They had to plant, they had to water, they had to harvest. And so let's kind of follow this as a picture for us to really see what it means to stop and trust in God. Farmers on Sabbath, what they would do if they followed Yahweh God is they would, instead of going outside to harvest some of their fruit, some of their grain, some of their crops, on Sabbath, they would intentionally stop and sit inside, and some of them might be getting anxious because they have a family to feed. And other farmers who don't follow God, they're working, they're harvesting, they're planting. But what they're supposed to do on Sabbath is sit inside, trust in God, and as they looked out the window, you know what they would see? They would see fruit fall to the ground, good fruit that they could have sold it for money. They would see those things fall to the ground and be destroyed. They would see birds come in and eat some of their crops, and they would just endure that. Why? Because they would cease from activity, they would stop. And as they would see that happen, as they would feel like other people are getting ahead and I need to do these things, they would intentionally stop and trust in God. That means they would recognize that God is Lord, that Jesus is Lord, that he's in control of how much money they make. He's in control of what college you get into, what happens in your relationships. He will do that work. But what we're called to do is, on Sabbath, we stop and we recognize, God, you're Lord. You're in control of all this. My life, my grades, my relationship, everything else I'm doing. And I just trust in you. That's one way we can practically rest in Jesus, to stop and just trust in him. That's the first thing. And the second thing that we can do as we Sabbath in Jesus is number 2, we remember and rest in Jesus. We remember and we rest in him. See, I know for the majority of this, I've been really harping on the people who are workaholics, who strive, and I'm pretty much saying, hey, we need to Sabbath, we need to rest. But I also know that there's a group of us that are enjoying our summer. We're playing a lot of games, watching a lot of movies, doing whatever you're doing, baking a lot of bread, doing other things. And you might be thinking, aha, this is what I'm talking about. I've been doing Sabbath my whole life. But see, it's not just doing whatever you want, as I said before. Sabbath is intentionally resting and remembering Jesus. Intentionally resting and remembering Jesus. What he's done for you, who he is. And maybe for a lot of us, this looks like getting into the Word, listening to sermons, podcasts, reading Christian books, reminding us of truth, having conversations with people who will remind us of God's truth so we can remember who he is and who we are in him. This is what it means to rest and to remember him. Praise songs, journaling, any other activity that reminds you of God. This is what Sabbath looks like. And this is what we need to rest in him. And see, Jesus, he changes how we rest. He's saying, not just take a nap, not just sleep, although that could be part of it. He's also saying, no, intentionally commune with me. Intentionally remember me. But Jesus doesn't just change the way that we rest. He changes the way that we work. See, if Sabbath is on Sunday and we work from our rest, do you know what this means? When you look at the cross, and you remember that Jesus has done everything perfect in your place on your behalf, that shapes the way that we see all the work we have to do. So what that means is schoolwork, instead of it being this daunting thing that we have to do excellent at, and if we fall short, our identity is ruined, we get into a bad college, we get humiliated, instead of relationships and friendships being so important that if we're not good with them anymore. We feel like we have no one, we're worthless. What this does is it changes the way that we work. Resting in Jesus, it's the gospel saying to us now that schoolwork, even if you fail, even if you don't get in, even if you get rejected, that schoolwork is just schoolwork. Those relationships that mean so much to you, yeah, of course you want friends. And of course you want those relationships to be mended, family relationships. But at the end of the day, those relationships are also just going to be relationships. Jesus, his perfection, his work defines who we are. Not what we do, not what has been done to us, not what we say or what we don't say. That does not define us anymore. These things don't define us. Jesus defines us. So even when all of these things fall apart in our life, Jesus looks at us and says, you're defined, you're loved, not because of what you've done, what you've worked for, but you are loved and you're accepted because of the work I've done for you. My life, my death, my resurrection, all for you. It changes the way that we work also. So that even if everything goes sideways, we still are secure in him. And just to get really practical, you might be wondering, okay, how do I actually stop and trust in God? How do I really rest and remember God on Sunday or whatever day you Sabbath? Just so you guys know, this is not my Sabbath day. I'm working technically right now, and my Sabbath day is Monday. I get Mondays off. And so what is Sabbath supposed to actually practically look like? And you might be thinking, okay, so do I just like sit in my room and like look out the window and I'm like, all right, I'll listen to some Hillsong or whatever, and then you just turn on worship music for like 12 hours as you stare out the window, and you're like, okay, I think I sat. Like, no, that's not what Sabbath looks like. I was thinking really hard about what this practically is for us. And I really think that the best picture of Sabbath we actually get, that a lot of us have experienced together, is it's actually retreat. You know, it's summer, and I know some of you guys have been wondering if we are going to have summer retreat. And sadly, the answer is no. We're not having it. Hopefully, we can have winter retreat. But when we go to retreat, this is, I think, a beautiful picture of Sabbath. Do you know what's happening? Every activity, everything in the schedule, all the games, all the meals, everything is pointing us back to God. We pray before we eat, we have to. We're singing worship songs, we're remembering the word, we're gathering together, where everything is oriented around God. Even the games, we try to add Jesus into the game. Everything is saturated by God, so everything, even our schedule, is dictated by him and points to him. We remember Jesus in everything. And I think that's what Sabbath looks like. So if you're trying to construct rest, if you're tired, burdened, stressed, anxious, panicked, afraid, if you're feeling these things, maybe what we need is Sabbath. And maybe we can begin Sabbath by thinking, how do I make this Sabbath day a little bit more like retreat? Where everything I do, even in my eating, even in the playing games, even in all the things, all the conversations, all the interactions, everything will ultimately point back to God, and I will find my rest and my identity in him. What does that look like for you? If you're tired and exhausted and burdened and fatigued, we need rest. And Jesus says to us, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. You need to Sabbath. Rest in me, remember me, and derive your identity not by the work you do, but by the work I've done for you. Let's pray. God, we thank you for the work you've done for us on the cross, your life, death, and resurrection. God, and so many of us are so burdened. A lot of it is our own expectations, our own pressures, our own identity that we We want to excel in school, and we want to look a certain way in front of other people, and we're working to build up who we are, when the whole time, Jesus, you say to us, rest, come to me. In the gospel, God, remind us that our identity is always secure in your name. God, remind us that you love us perfectly, and that work now is just work for us. God, help us to Sabbath, even with our summer, even with all the time we have. God, help us to intentionally trust in you, to rest and remember you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
You were the Word at the beginning, one with God the Lord Most High. Your hidden glory in creation, now revealed in you are Christ. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ our King. What a beautiful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus. Didn't want heaven without. So Jesus, you brought heaven down. My sin was great, your love was greater. What could separate us now? What a wonderful name it is. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ our King. What a wonderful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. Death could not hold you, the veil tore before you. You silenced the boast of sin and grave. The heavens are roaring, the praise of your glory. For you are raised to life again. You have no rival,
announcements before we end. Um, this Friday, we don't have any hub or any gatherings, but I think the following, not, so I think it's 4th of July weekend this weekend. And then I think July 12th, that Friday, we're trying to get something to happen. It's TBD, to be determined. So we'll let you know about that. But actually, sorry, this Sunday, we don't have Sunday service with Catapult either. We're gonna join the adults in their main service. So just make sure that you guys aren't here, but join with your family or whoever and join us for that. July 14th, though, we do have youth service here at church on campus, live in person, where we can be together and worship God in the same building. All right, dude, isn't that so exciting? Woo! Yeah, so you do have to register online for that. The link is going to be in the description down below. So please sign up, register so that we can see one another, say hi, do some arm little hello. I've been doing a lot of that lately. And yeah, so we really would like to see all of you guys there. It'd be so fun. Please, 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 please sign up. All right, so let me just end in a word of prayer and we'll end the stream. Dear Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful Sabbath day, oh Lord. I just pray that as we go throughout today, that we really have rest, but also let this rest be about you. Let everything point to you, God, and let us just be reminded of your grace, your power, and your wonderfulness. I just pray that as we go throughout the week, we may feel refreshed through the Sabbath and just be with us, guide us, and help us. And thank you. In your name we pray. Amen. Bye-bye. Your wonderfulness. I just pray that as we go throughout the week, we may feel refreshed